Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. As always, I'd like to start off by thanking you, the listener, for tuning in to Into the Afroverse. Truly appreciate your support as we enter into in the middle of our second year of being on air. And it could not happen without you guys tuning in, so I truly appreciate it. Today's episode, we have Dr. LaWana Richmond. And Dr. Richmond is the San Diego coordinator for the Black Speculative Arts Movement and a fellow at UC San Diego Indigenous Futures Institute. For the past 7 years, she's led the production of the Afrofuturism Lounge, Afrofuturism Dream Tank, and more recently, AfroCo and AfroFutureCon. She's presented and facilitated, participated in, and led discussions on Afrofuturism, both virtually and in real life, at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the UN Conference on the Status of Women, the UN Youth Summit, and the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, as well as UC San Diego, UC Los Angeles, Cal State Fullerton, San Diego State University, and the California Department of Education, San Diego County Office of Education, San Diego Public Library, San Diego City College, local arts and nonprofit organizations, some corporations. When I tell you we get the talent here at Into the Afroverse, this is yet another example. And with that, I'd like to welcome the highly decorated Dr. LaWana Richmond. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. So with this impressive bio, and I've only mentioned just part of it, with the work that you've been doing, can you share with us, please, what is it that got you into Afrofuturism, and what is it about Afrofuturism that speaks to you?
So I've been reading science fiction since I was 8 years old, just consuming it, inhaling it. And I think that helped shape my worldview. But more recently, as we were dealing with a lot of social justice issues, especially just before the pandemic, we were dealing with over policing and just the devaluing of Black lives. Working at a university, I got to see how it was impacting our students. And I realized Afrofuturism created space for us to address some of these inequities in a more affirming and action oriented way. With my goal being that we center our locus of control and understand that, you know, the outside forces that we have no control over will continue to be what they are. And of course, we should try to exert our influence on them. But I would really like us to understand our inside forces and our internal innate abilities and our actions, our behaviors, our choices, our attitudes, the way that we choose to move in society together and individually shapes our future.
I see. Now, when folks hear Afrofuturism and you discuss it, or it's discussed in the way you just described, what do you say to people that have heard and been around for other movements in the past, other schools of thought as relates to the Black community, and they may say this is just yet, another one in a long list? What is it, in your opinion, that separates Afrofuturism from other movements or other circles of thought that have existed in the past or currently exist within Black circles?
So first of all, the way I see it, and I'm sure you talk to many people with different perspectives on Afrofuturism, but when we're thinking about our future, that includes everything. How we're going to eat, sleep, drink, live, walk, how we'll relate to each other, what our families are going to be like, how we're going to educate our children. So, with that as a context, I would say that it's related and connected to all of the previous movements, especially in the sense of being aspirational. I think the biggest difference is the fact that it creates space for us to imagine something that is not necessarily linearly connected to where we are. And it puts more of the onus on us to be, do, have, and create the future that we want.
I see. So how does Afrofuturism fit into what is now 2024 as far as helping us to establish a better future? How do you see it figuring into it coming up on election season? There's the ongoing challenges when it comes to medicine, law enforcement. When I talk about the challenges in medicine, I mean in terms of the way we're treated. You see
Oh,
all these
healthcare
reports.
disparities.
Yeah, exactly. And disparities in economics and all these other areas of human activity. How does Afrofuturism fit into that? And how can we use it to improve our position in these different arenas?
I mean, I think part of it is understanding that we need to, and I'm going to take this from Ronaldo Anderson, a conversation he and I just had, but we need to really encourage ourselves and our young people to get in the habit of planting trees whose shade we will not be here to enjoy.
Gotcha.
And so, what I mean by that, all of those areas that you're talking about, we have the ability to create legacy. We can support the young people that are coming after us to enable and empower them to have more control. If we really are not happy with Western medicine and the way that it treats, and double entendre intended us, we need to be more intentional about cultivating, curating, and supporting the healers within our society. If we look at economic systems, if we continue to invest in support and pour our money into brand names that belong to people that wouldn't welcome anybody that looked like us in their home for dinner, then that's what we'll get. I mean, a lot of it is thinking. I'm sure you've seen the things about how long dollars circulate in different communities.
Right.
So just getting us to move from, part of it is without hope, there is no like planning for the future. We have a tendency to live in these day to day, or as Andre 3000 said at one point, I live check to check, right? And so what do we do to change that? And a lot of that is not about asking other people to like us or asking other people to change their thoughts or create space or even give us opportunities, because we forget that we can make our own opportunities.
And I agree with that 100%. And I always tell folks when we talk about Afrofuturism, we were Afrofuturists before the term.
Absolutely.
And I look at, what we accomplished before any of us were here, and in terms
Mhm.
of from the ancient times to more recent times, it seemed like we were always thinking about the future. We were always putting
Mhm.
something down, creating something. But in recent years, back to your point, it seems like we've lost that. When do you think we started to lose this idea of, to use your term, planting these trees and, we may not be around to enjoy the shade? When do you think that that began to happen? And what can we do? And you kind of hinted at this, but I want you to expound on it. What can we do to start to change the mindset and the mentality of folks that don't have that idea of, laying the foundation for something that they may not be around to enjoy?
I mean, I think part of it is, we talk about, we want to make our ancestors proud. But, I say, let's make our descendants proud. Let's make our descendants like grateful for the fact that we understood the need for proper irrigation in order for land to be fruitful 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. For the sacrifices that we make so that young people can have educational opportunities and experiences to expand their vision and broaden their horizons for the good of us all. I mean, part of it is like delayed gratification. I don't know if you are familiar with the marshmallow experiment. And the thing about the marshmallow experiment is they took like, I think it was like 3-year-olds, it was either 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds, and they took an individual 4-year-old, put him in a room, put a plate in front of him, that had a marshmallow on it. And they told them, if you don't eat the marshmallow, if you wait until I come back in the room, um, you can have two marshmallows instead of just one. And there were a lot of kids who were unable to resist and they ate the marshmallow.
Right.
But they tracked the kids who were able to delay their gratification, and they received the reward of the other marshmallow. But more importantly, over time, as they became adults, they tended to be more successful because they made decisions based on long-term gains instead of short-term, let me get this whatever it is that they want right now.
Wow.
And so, I bring that up to say that you know part of it is how many of our young people don't believe there is a future. I have to confess, when I was 15, I didn't think I was going to see adulthood. Everything that was going on around me and in my own life, I just didn't have any hope for the future, so I definitely wasn't planning for a future. I'm grateful that that changed, but I felt that way and I can understand that feeling. And so what do we do to help people understand? Part of it, of course, is teaching history and showing, that there are times that have been terrible and things have changed or shifted. And part of that, you know, is spiritual practice for me personally. I think, and not necessarily pushing any religion, but understanding that there are things that are greater than us, and even when things seem impossible, they're not.
That's an excellent point. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones, where we're taking Black folks into the future. And we're joined today by Dr. LaWana Richmond, and we're talking Afrofuturism. What else are we going to talk about on Into the Afroverse? So, with this discussion, and you had started off talking about your love of science fiction and fantasy, part of Afrofuturism is just that. How do
Mhm.
those things fit into what you just talked about, or how can it fit into what you just talked about in terms of having these science fiction, these fantasy stories, and so forth? How does that help us in creating and building and improving ourselves for a better future?
So, I mean, I'll start by saying, we can look at examples of how science fiction became science fact.
Hmm.
The idea, the act of imagining something is the beginning of the process of creation.
Gotcha.
And so if you want circumstances that you've never had before, first you have to imagine them. One of my challenges one of the things I do is an Afrofuturism Dream Tank where I talk to people about the future. One of the challenges that I've experienced is asking people, what is it that you want in the future? Or, how do you see us living? Or what do you see as like the most important thing for us to focus on in order to have a better future? Most people haven't thought about that. They haven't thought that far ahead. They've only thought about, how I'm gonna pay my car note next month.
Right.
And so, it's a process. It's teaching, it's giving the freedom. I mean, children don't have a problem with imagination. As adults, we tell them that they need to be more realistic and more practical. Um, as I was becoming an adult, I had people tell me I needed to be less idealistic and I needed to be more pragmatic and more practical. And, my response was, it's not that I don't see the world as it is. And it's not even that I can't accept that it is what it is, but I refuse to settle for it being what it is. And I will always um, imagine how things could be better. Because how do you get to better if you can't even imagine it?
That's an excellent point. So with that, and I certainly agree in terms of the way that science fiction and fantasy and those things can help us, you know, that too is the challenge, especially nowadays, as you're seeing more and more black faces in those spaces. You're starting to see the recognition of black creators and so forth. And it's really upsetting a lot of folks because it's challenging for a lot of people to envision black people in the future, to see Black creators build a future. And I think that it's kind of showing how important that it must be, because now all of a sudden folks are upset about it. Whereas before, when it was generally these white faces and these white creators that were associated with science fiction and fantasy, America didn't have a problem with it. But now that we see it changing, there is a problem. What do you think about that?
I think it's funny that the problem is so bad. Once Black creators started winning Nebula Awards and Eisner Awards, people started saying they were rigged and saying, "Oh, they only won because they were Black." When did we ever like win anything because we was Black?
Right.
But I think that it creates a space for I have some questions. Like, when Discover came out, there were a lot of people who took issue with the Black characters. And it's funny to me because how can you be a genuine Trekkie with this whole, like, approach to the universe where everybody is basically equal and other cultures are respected, and we're not worried about money, we're more worried about the pursuit of the common good, and then be racist at the same time.
True. Well, I think what it is for a long time in this country, uh, storytelling was seen almost as a safe haven for whiteness. And, and then I'm sure everyone listening, if you're of a certain age, you grew up watching stories of, the fantastic and so forth, and it was always white centered. And if Black folks were there, most 9 times out of 10 were just simply absent. It was there for comic relief, playing on those stereotypes and so forth. And I think folks got comfortable with creating these safe spaces for whiteness. And anytime things got too tough in the real world, they would retreat to these spaces to kind of reinvigorate themselves or motivate themselves. And now they can no longer do that. And I think that's a big part of the problem. Like you said, Star Trek, that's the whole point. That's the whole
Right.
premise. So I think it really says a lot to, like you said, see folks now upset with programs like Star Trek and others, where you have Black people in the space. Um,
Yeah.
please.
I mean, I'm thinking about, because I read more white science fiction than Black science fiction, just because at the time I started reading it, that's what was more readily available.
Right,
And I think about books like Robert Heinlein's Farnham's Freehold. And there's a character, the Black character was basically, it lives up to everything you said, in terms of not really, yeah, it was pretty racist. But at the same time, it was interesting to think that racism survived the apocalypse. But I mean, but that was, that also informed my view. I think the reality is, Pleasantville, which is, this whole science fiction fantasy about, the perfect place where
yes,
everybody gets along. It was in black and white. And I think the one Black character was like the milkman or something like that, which is, comedy.
right,
Um, it, but the thing is, and this goes into, at the core, education, socialization, culture, is who are we trusting to decide what is real, what is right, what is something to aspire to, what principles and values we should be grounded in. And Afrofuturism is a term that we got in 1993, I think, from Mark Derry, but Sankofa predates that.
right.
The Dogon culture predates that. And it was really, what I like about Sankofa is it explicitly connects the past, present, and future. um, I will tell you, I am guilty of um, time slipping because, I'm thinking about the past, the present, and the future. Most of the time, kind of overlaying them in terms of how they influence each other. And, I look up and, hours have gone by. But it's really, if we're looking at making things change, we need to take all the data that's available, the data from the past, the data of current events, and then also um, theories about, targets to set for the future.
Excellent.
And we cannot let other people's perspective on that. Um, you know, there are people there, what is it? The Rockefellers have planned 1,000 years in the future. Um, there's a lot of planning and forecasting that's happening. There's a whole science called foresight where people project and traject into the future. And, we talk about being left behind, but if we really don't want to be left behind, we just got to move.
Excellent points. And when you talk about this idea of where we getting our template from for behavior and so forth, it seems now in recent years that that's becoming even more problematic for many Black people, where I'm starting to see, maybe because of the technology that exists and social media and so forth, I would say perhaps at a rate that has not been seen previously, where we're just being fed constantly what we should be by folks that are not us and folks that don't have our best interest. So I like that Afrofuturism, or the idea of Sankofa, as you mentioned, brings us back to this idea of planning us and also looking at ourselves for
Mhm.
guidance to the future, as opposed to folks that are outside the community, don't understand us, and in many instances don't have our best interests at heart. What is it that do you think that we can construct, or we can build upon, to ensure that we're getting the proper template and the proper guidance as we move forward?
Well, I think part of it, in no way I'm not opposed to any of the organizations, sects, or institutions that we've created within our culture, but I really, need I'm looking for us to see more intergenerational, more cross-sectional, aspirational collaboration and interaction, and for us to take ownership of making sure that we are teaching our children our history. We are currently in a state of the teaching of history is being fought about in courtrooms now, in
Mhm.
terms of, what is the truth, and then even it's not even a question, I understand, of what's true and what's not true. It's about what makes people feel uncomfortable. And so that is going to play out however it plays out. But meanwhile, we have a whole generation of young people that need to know their history so that they understand why the world is in the state that it is in, and understand that it is not um, due to any lack or deficiency on our part.
Very important point. And certainly within Afrofuturism, you do have the history as well as projecting into the future to kind of counter that and counterbalance that. So speaking to that, what can you tell us about your current work in terms of the things that you're actively doing and participating in?
Wow. So a couple of years ago, I got involved with an organization, the EDFU Foundation, that introduced me to some of the UN forums and proceedings.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I got involved with the Black Speculative Arts movement, which introduced me to Afrofuturists all over the world. And with that, you mentioned some of the presentations I've done in different UN forums. Currently, I'm a member of the International Civil Society Working Group for the United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent, where, I engage in conversations about, policy and interaction and ways to leverage that mechanism towards our own upliftment, I guess would be a way to put it.
Mhm.
But then more recently, I've been part of a group called Afro for UN, where we've drafted, submitted the first draft of a document for inclusion in the Pact for the Future that'll be released in the United Nations Forum on the Future in September of 2024. And I'm working kind of behind the scenes with different groups to look at, policy. And then locally, my focus is really, I've been doing these big events, and I think I'm at that's why I said you caught me at an interesting place, because I've been enforced leisure is a great time for thinking
Right.
and planning. And I realize that as much as people get excited about events with hundreds of people, if we're talking about actually reaching and connecting with people and getting them to like shift in their mindset or thinking. I'll be hosting some small group events this year. I'll be doing a series of salons where I'll have like maybe 20 people in the room to do deep dives on different subjects in an Afrofuturism Dream Tank format, similar to what I did at the Commission on the Status of Women last year or earlier. Yeah, last year. It's 2024 now.
Okay, so you're busy. In
Yeah.
other words, you're busy. So how can folks find you? How can they contact you?
So I'm pretty active on Instagram. Probably the easiest one is Dr. LaWana, DrLaWANA. I also have, channels for Feriali, which is like what I write under, because I still write poetry, and every now and then somebody might catch me at an open mic. And then my website, I have drlawana.com and then afrofuturismlounge.com.
Excellent. And believe it or not, we are coming to the close of this segment. Do you have any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
I think the biggest thing is, Afrofuturism can fit into a variety of environments and has a variety of applications. If all you want to do is just use it as a way to imagine and create art, music, literature, I encourage people to engage wherever they are so that they can create content that can perhaps inspire our future doctors and engineers and policymakers and healers. So it's not a you've got to follow a specific path. And what is it? There are many paths to any given destination. And I encourage us to all, as they say, get in where we fit in because our future is really up to us.
Excellent. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on Into the Afroverse. We're taking Black folks into the future and also give you an open invitation to return whenever you'd like to discuss further your work, any upcoming projects, or any appearances, anything like that. Thank you so much for the insightful commentary. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, folks, so that'll do it for another episode of Into the Afroverse. And I'm your host, William Jones, and Into the Afroverse is we're taking Black folks into the future. People always ask, what can they do to support the show to keep us on air? Go to my website, afrofuturismnet.com, and you can see there how you can support us. And thank you to everyone that has been supporting us for these last year and a half now, coming up on 2 years. Also, you can check out past episodes on the YouTube channel at Afrofuturism Network. And a special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. Thank you and take care.